The following is a fictional story of events that may happen in the near future. 8 a.m. New York Stock Exchange. It's a cold, breezy day on Wall Street as markets await the Federal Reserve's announcement for QE4. Futures are up significantly. The Dow Jones just breached its 2008 high of 14,164. Gold just hit an all-time high of 2,900. Silver just breached $100 per ounce. The dollar index is holding at 53. With official unemployment at 16.3%, there is a nervous feeling on Wall Street that if this doesn't work, the world could implode into a depression that will last for the remainder of the decade. 8:19 a.m. Beijing. Chinese officials announced that they can no longer allow Washington to devalue their holdings. After making their concerns private, China accepts that Washington will never stop paying its debts with inflated currency. China makes an official statement from Beijing, quote, "We have made our concerns known privately for some time. With QE4 about to be announced today, China will have no choice but to stop purchasing U.S. treasuries. We have allowed Washington to try to work through their imbalances for 4 years. But with global inflation and U.S. consumers rapidly shrinking as a percentage of global GDP, we feel that a Western recovery is unlikely until they reform their entitlement programs." 8:45 a.m. New York Stock Exchange. Upon hearing the statement from China, Dow futures have a sharp reversal and begin to drop. Gold leaps past $3,000 per ounce, up $150 per ounce in the last 26 minutes. CNBC awaits a statement from the White House. 8:50 a.m. Washington, D.C. The president makes an official statement to calm investors' fears. He tells Americans that he has spoken with several G20 leaders. They have assured him that they will continue to increase their purchase of treasuries and believe that a strong U.S. economy is the only thing that will bring back global prosperity. He has also spoken to Chairman Bernanke, who assures him that a strong dollar will be the result of QE4. The president also reminds Americans that his recent New Deal recovery programs that he passed through executive order will increase the likelihood of a lasting recovery. He also notes that Beijing, since 2009, has slowly been reducing their holdings, so the impact will be minimal. 9:51 a.m. New York. Dow futures fall 850 points in the first 20 minutes of trading. Markets are halted for 1 hour by the authorities. 10 a.m. Main Street, America. The news about the stock market in China has now spread. A panic begins to set in and unprepared Americans rush to the grocery store. In an attempt to purchase food and water, Americans that didn't know what was going on are alerted by all of the news stories and panic buying. Within 50 minutes, there is a nationwide rush to the stores. Empty store shelves in America become a reality. 10:52 a.m. New York. Markets reopen and the Dow Jones resumes its collapse. Investors around the world join the sell-off in bonds and stocks and begin to purchase commodities. Unlike the panic of 2008, this time commodities are seen as the only safe haven from a dollar crisis. 11:30 a.m. New York. The Dow falls 1,700 points since reopening. Trading is halted for at least 2 hours. The Federal Reserve injects $200 billion into the markets and announces that QE4 will be delayed until further notice. Congress is called back to D.C. for an emergency joint session. Some members of Congress are saying that they consider China's statement a financial attack. 12 p.m. Main Street, America. Several cities begin to see civil unrest after grocery stores are forced to close. Traffic in the streets and violence break out. The president puts the National Guard on alert for a possible deployment onto U.S. streets if things don't get under control soon. Several news agencies are reporting injuries at grocery chains and call for the authorities to do something before it gets worse. 12:15 p.m. Toronto, Canada. George Soros tells CNBC that a run on treasuries is imminent and that there is nothing the government can do to stop it. He says it is unfortunate that a controlled decline of the dollar was not coordinated better over the years. Today really could have been avoided if not for the Tea Party politicians who demanded fiscal responsibility and a constitutional government. 3 p.m. Gold closes at $11.53 for the day at $4,053 per ounce. Silver closes at $173 per ounce. The president announces that due to civil unrest in some areas of the country, U.S. stock markets will remain closed for the rest of the day. With the exception of mining and other inflation-related stocks, the majority of U.S. stocks are down significantly due to the sell-off and flight to safety in commodities. The Federal Reserve announces that it will begin to purchase U.S. treasuries and stocks in order to stabilize the markets. But this only feeds investors' fears of a full-blown treasury run and collapse of the dollar. 6 p.m. Asia. Asian markets begin a massive sell-off. Dollar collapse rumors begin to take hold of the markets. CNBC Asia looks into a possible COMEX default and complete breakdown in the U.S. economy. Gold spikes in Asia, up 17.50 in the first complete hour of trading. Gold is now at 58.03. 7 p.m. Gold and silver bullion dealers across the world have suspended all sales due to no inventory. A COMEX default is now expected. Several central bank representatives propose a freeze on currency markets and a fixed devaluation of the US dollar in order to calm investors. 7:30 p.m. the United States. The sun sets on America. In the last 12 hours, the world has changed. Americans are glued to their televisions, taking a crash course on a debauched currency. Smoke from fires in the cities have put a dark cloud over the nation. 7:45, the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve announces it will inject $1.5 trillion into the markets in order to stop any further decline in stocks. 7:55 p.m., OPEC. The final nail in the coffin. OPEC nations halt oil trades in US dollars until further notice. They will only accept euros, renminbi, or gold. 7:59 p.m. The Federal Reserve's announcement to inject $1.5 trillion into the markets causes a sharp reversal in overseas markets. Stocks begin to rally even as Main Street melts down. 8 p.m., Manhattan. Gerard Adams, president of the National Inflation Association, sends out an urgent email alert. In it, he informs members that it is with great sadness that the time to warn and prepare Americans for hyperinflation has ended.
The strength of a nation's currency is based on the strength of that nation's economy. And the American economy is by far the strongest in the world. Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
August 15th, 1971 will stand as an important event in economic history for many, many generations. In fact, hundreds of years from now, people will look back to that day.
The sun rises today as it has a million times before. Commuters wake up and travel to their offices to begin the day's work. Farmers tend to their crops. Construction workers build new infrastructure. Today is a day like any other. Or is it? In 2008, the world experienced one of the greatest financial turmoils in history. Markets around the world started crashing, and major financial institutions, once thought to be invincible, started showing signs of collapse. Governments responded quickly, issuing massive bailouts and stimulus packages in an effort to keep the world economy afloat. And it worked. The global economy recovered much quicker than most predicted, and soon it was back to business as usual. And yet, something still isn't quite right. A growing sense of unease fills the population. In the world of finance, indeed, in all facets of modern life, cracks have started to appear.
There's angst out there, and I think if you talk to people on the street today, they would tell you, I don't know what's causing all this, but this just doesn't feel normal to me. You know, the government's running $1 trillion worth of deficit. Why isn't the economy improving? The government's going to spend almost $3.7 trillion. Why don't I have a job? Why is the unemployment rate at 9%? And I even think that number's understated.
A lot of people are feeling unsure about the world today, concerned that something terrible is waiting in the wings. We're told that the global financial crisis of a few years ago has been fixed. But what if the crisis isn't the cause of the angst so many of us feel, but rather the symptom of a much deeper problem?
At Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, delegates from 44 allied and associate countries arrived for the opening of the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference.
Our story begins in 1944. With World War II coming to an end, the Allied nations met at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to create a new financial system which would stabilize the world once the war ended. With America poised to enter a golden age of prosperity, the U.S. dollar was chosen as the world's reserve currency.
The Bretton Woods system was created after the Second World War at the Bretton Woods Conference in New Hampshire. And rather than using gold as the means of exchange between countries, as was the case under the old gold standard, the dollar was going to be used. The dollar was chosen because back then it was as good as gold.
Under this new system, countries agreed to fix their currencies to the U.S. dollar, and the U.S. dollar would be tied to gold at a price of $35 per ounce. This meant that countries around the world could trade their currencies for U.S. dollars, which they could then exchange for gold. This created a system where all currencies were essentially backed by gold. To avoid the logistics of shipping physical gold across the world, when countries did exchange their currencies for gold, it was usually stored safely in the U.S.
Under the Bretton Woods system, you could exchange your currency or your dollars for gold. Now, it only applied to foreign countries and central banks. And we began to run budget deficits. We were running the Great Society program under Lyndon Johnson, and we were fighting a war in Vietnam. And all of a sudden, we were running these deficits, and countries were changing their dollars, and they said they wanted gold. And it began with the French, and then it started to spread.
Other countries became concerned that the U.S. was spending more money than it had gold reserves. They started exchanging their dollars for gold and demanded physical delivery.
China and Brazil have just struck a deal to ditch the U.S. dollar. Whoops.
Majority worried about inflation. The majority say he's dishonest. Steve, are they ready for this? China is now trying to replace the U.S. dollar with their currency in global trade. What do you think of that story, Steve?
Well, China for several years has made very clear, along with the Russians, they want to downgrade the dollar because they think that'll enhance their power around the world. And certainly the way we've treated the dollar over the year has gone in that direction. However, people are not going to trust the Chinese yuan. You may get these one-off deals like they're doing with the French, but China does not have real capital markets. China has capital controls. And so in terms of currency, people are going to prefer the dollar to the yuan. And so in that sense, I think we've got some time to get our house in order.
De-dollarization of the international economy is gaining momentum. This is spearheaded by powerful countries like China and Russia. At the recent state visits by Chinese President Xi Jinping in Russia, President Vladimir Putin indicated that they are in favor of using Chinese currency for trade in other parts of the world, like Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The Kremlin has been slapped with a raft of sanctions by the Western world for invading Ukraine.
Для нас была и остается тематика торгово-экономического взаимодействия.
A serious incentive for the development of trade and investment cooperation is the expansion of the practice of settlements between our countries in national currencies. According to the results of the first 3 quarters of last year, The share of ruble and yuan in mutual commercial transactions reached 65% and continues to grow, which allows us to protect mutual trade from the influence of third countries and negative trends in global currency markets.
Отметку в 200 миллиардов долларов.
Another BRICS country, India, has indicated that it's putting into place a mechanism for international trade settlements in rupees. The Indian currency will allow New Delhi to bypass using the US dollar in case of sanctions. India is also a major buyer of Russian arms, and Indian refineries have started paying for most of their Russian oil in other currencies rather than the US dollar. Meanwhile, Kenyan President William Ruto has unveiled a plan to deal with the dollar crisis.
As a government, we have made innovative intentions and undertaken innovative strategy to ensure that we ease the burden of availability of dollar in our market. We just concluded last week an arrangement, a market-driven arrangement in our fuel sector that will see Kenya access all our fuel needs on a deferred 6-month credit. That will demand of $500 million every month from this market. And therefore, for the people who work numbers, I am giving you free advice that those of you who are holding dollars, you surely might go into losses.
Hello, fellow Rebel Capitals. Hope you're well. So this just in the news. The dollar has actually been replaced by the Chinese yuan in this country. Let's dive right into this Bloomberg article, check it out, and then try to connect some dots so we can answer the question, is the dollar doomed? Is this the death of the dollar? Has China just killed the dollar? Well, let's get right into Bloomberg and check it out. Title of the article, Chinese yuan replaces the dollar as most traded currency in Russia. I mean, this is huge news for sure. So let's look at this chart to begin with. And you can see in March of 2022, the dollar ruble volume is represented by this light blue line. Chinese yuan ruble represented by the dark blue line, or dark or black, or whatever you want to call it. I think it's dark blue. And you can see how the amount of the transaction volume with USD ruble has gone down since July of 2022. Its trend is down. And then you can see how the Chinese yuan ruble, the trend is definitely up to a point where this month, and it looks like the month March, looks like in February as well, the Chinese yuan actually exceeded, it replaced the dollar as the most traded currency in Russia. So if you're watching the news, if you're on social media, everybody's talking about how this is huge. This just goes to show you how the entire world is de-dollarizing. And straight from a massive commodity producer like Russia. And therefore, if countries continue to de-dollarize, then that could mean the end of the dollar as the reserve currency. And all those dollars are going to come flooding back into the United States, and it's just going to create massive amounts of inflation. There's just less and less demand for dollars globally. And we can see that playing out right in front of our own eyes. But there's always a big but, according to Sir Mix-a-Lot, of course. But outside of Sir Mix-a-Lot, this big but needs to include the liability side of the global balance sheet. Let me explain to you what I'm talking about. First and foremost, let's look at this chart. So when someone sees this, and you hear about this in the mainstream media, everyone is saying, oh my gosh, this is an example of how the dollar is completely doomed. But is it? Let's just take a step back here. Let's think about this. Currently, Russia is basically in a proxy war with the United States. And the United States, way back in March of 2022, sanctioned Russia. They froze all of their dollar accounts. So if you're an entity in Russia right now, are you really going to want to hold dollars? Probably not. So you're doing a lot of business with China. So what are you going to hold? Well, you're going to start holding yuan. Okay, well, I guess maybe a better question would be if you're an entity in Russia and you've had your dollar accounts frozen, are you going to hold any dollars at all? For me, the answer would be absolutely not. But what if you didn't have a choice? What if you had to? Because you had to transact globally with other entities that were still using dollars. Remember, dollars are still 60%, 65% of global settlement. So you're in a very difficult position to where you'd be like, well, I don't really want to hold these dollars, but I have to. So you see, when I look at this chart, I don't really see dollar weakness. I see dollar strength. Let me put it to you in a different way. Let's say that we are the United States goes to war. I mean, heaven forbid, but let's say we go to war with China. Okay, how many of you are going to hold Chinese yuan in your bank account? Nobody. Nobody, because we're at war with China. They're sanctioning us. They're doing all these bad things. The last thing we want to do is hold Chinese yuan. So the fact that any Russian entities are holding and trading dollars at all above 0% shows you the power of the network effect the dollar has.
Banks start to play out the sequel of the bailout of 2008, the rest of the world seems to legitimately be thinking about moving away from a dollar-centric economy. In recent weeks, we've seen many countries exploring the idea of either creating a new currency, such as South American countries that say, let's not have a dollar-based currency anymore. Let's have a South American centralized currency. This is not pinned on the US dollar, and they're looking to other superpowers perhaps to pin their currencies on. Over the weekend, Sudan announced that it is interested in ditching the US dollar so that it can trade freely with Russia. Due to Russian sanctions, they have not been able to trade what they want to trade. And maybe you're thinking, well, that's not very threatening because you don't hear much about a big Sudanese economy, but Sudan is resource rich, even if its economy is not. Sudan has oil, and guess what else? According to Encyclopedia Britannica, Sudan has other known mineral deposits that are not all exploited, including gold, uranium, chromite, gypsum, mica, marble, and iron ore, all things that are going to become increasingly necessary in the modern economy. Do you think the U.S. wants to see those resources moved freely between Russia and Sudan?
No, they do not. No, they do not.
Without taking a cut through the dollar exchange?
Of course. No, we need those desperately. And particularly when you I just talk about iron ore specifically, but also uranium. Absolutely, we want these. We're not going to give these over.
Well, that has already been happening. In fact, according to the RT today, in fact, Khartoum is interested in increasing this. That's a Sudanese politician is interested in increasing cooperation with Russian businesses in mineral exploration and mining. According to Siraj, a number of Russian exploration and mining companies are already operating in Sudan, and the African country expects to attract more Russian investments to the sector, with several agreements agreements already under discussion. In fact, last month, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov visited Sudan, where he held talks with his Sudanese counterparts, Ali al-Sadiq, and other top officials. Siraj called Lavrov's visit an important milestone in the development of Sudan-Russian bilateral relations. Okay, so that's worth watching. Definitely. Guess who else may want to ditch the U.S. dollar? Iran. This article doesn't exactly say that they want to ditch the U.S. dollar, but it does show an appetite for a new type of currency, especially because 2 weeks ago, the Iranian rial dropped to an all-time low against the dollar. But guess what? Over the weekend, Iran agreed to a peace deal with Saudi Arabia, and the currency jumped back up, according to an Iran International News. Iran's battered currency, the rial, rose more than 10% on Saturday following this agreement that we're going to talk about in a lot around Saudi Arabia. The rial has risen 25% since February 26th, when it dropped to a historic low of 600,000 to $1 US. The visit by the head of the UN nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, to Tehran on March 4th helped the rial rally, seen as a possible opening to resolve the country's nuclear dispute with the US. The restoration of ties with Saudi Arabia provided another significant boost. So that's interesting because there wasn't much reporting around Iran moving towards cooperation with the IAEA to patch up the nuclear deal. That's good to know. And I think the U.S. hasn't said much about this because they don't want to actually put the nuclear deal back in place,
right,
because Iran is being too friendly with Russia.
Well, also think about it. What's interesting, I didn't realize, and we should have, right, but that Iran is so heavily tied to the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency, right?
Yes.
Like, think about, they've been called the axis of evil. Like, how long do you have to be? It's like, I don't know, how long do you have to be in this bad relationship before you make a move on this, you know?
Well, right. That's all detailed in a great book called The History of American Hegemony, about how the U.S. actually made moves that were underhanded in order to base petrol on the U.S. dollar. And
right.
It's the hidden hand of American democracy, hegemony. I'm getting that wrong, so let's just move on. So these countries have been turning to China, and in fact, this was a big diplomatic win over the weekend when China brokered a peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And this is a role that the U.S. typically really likes to play, is being the go-between between important world powers. Here is the New York Times, usually a White House mouthpiece, even admitting that this looks bad for the U.S., that they weren't even invited to the party. Take a look at this. The New York Times is saying, this brokering a reapproachment between the Middle Eastern rivals underscores the Chinese leader's ambition of offering an alternative to a U.S.-led world order. I feel like that's a really big subtitle, admitting that the world order is around the U.S.
Right.
And that the entire world is saying, we may not actually need them.
No, I mean, it's an admission, finally, an awareness of this. All you need, again, literally the headlines on Drudge today are, China is now lasering Hawaii. What does that mean? Scanning Hawaii for a possible attack. China could strike Pearl Harbor. Like, all of the concerns about China, again, all comes back to the American hegemony, the talk of like war provoking China. It's about the U.S. dollar. It's about the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency of the world, and it's under attack.
Yes.
And all you need to see are these stories. I mean, China, Sudan, Iran, list of South American countries that we've been going through, all trying to move away from the U.S. dollar.
Right.
And why wouldn't they? I mean, if you're with the U.S. dollar, that gives us the ability to sanction you whenever we want to and just completely turn your economy upside down. Why would anybody want us to have that power over their economy?
Yeah, I mean, if there was a powerful alternative, right? I mean, this is why Mexico moving towards, trying to be in the BRICS nations. It's like, if there was an alternative that could stand on these commodities and strength, But
this is a chicken or egg phenomenon, because in order to break with the United States, you have to be able to suffer the sanctions that the United States will slap on you because you've insulted them. And so it really becomes a situation where, there's almost nothing more dangerous than someone who's powerful that's losing power.
Right.
And I feel like that's what we're going to see.
That's exactly what was happening right now.
And And so the New York Post went as far as to say this, that as China becomes the broker while Joe Biden is the joker. It's kind of a good one, right? That's
pretty good.
That's fun. We'll give that headline writer I failed the headline writing section in journalism school because they were like, it was.
You'd never be able to work at the New York Post, which is like the king of headlines.
No, I don't do blurbism. I don't do catchy one-liners. I write essays. So yes, this is especially embarrassing for President Biden after he personally intervened.
Are we seeing a color revolution in, of all places, Israel? That's right. Well, the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu's son, has directly now accused the Biden administration of meddling, being behind the scenes of the mass protests against the judicial process and the judicial reform that his country and Well, Klaus Schwab's World Economic Forum is underway right now in Davos, Switzerland. The globalists meeting to decide how they will control you for the next decade or so of your life, or maybe even the next 100 years. But who is Klaus Schwab? The man that sits at the helm of the World Economic Forum, the WEF. Well, investigative journalist Johnny Vedmore has spent a long time investigating Klaus Schwab, and he joins me now. And Johnny, as we were talking here before the show, I mean, it's not just about Klaus Schwab. These tentacles are deep and they are wide. What made you start investigating Klaus Schwab?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Clayton. Me and my girlfriend Whitney, we were sitting around the coffee table in Chile, and we were looking for information on him. And Whitney said to me, "Why don't you investigate Klaus Schwab? You go back in the time through the elites of history."
Let's talk about this bank panic and the destruction of the U.S. dollar. I'm going to say something that probably defies some conventional wisdom right now, and I'm sure that there will be detractors out there, but I don't care, actually, because if I'm right, then a lot of people might actually be able to protect themselves and protect their families. And if I'm wrong, well, guess what? No one gets hurt. In fact, you'll actually be a little bit safer and a little bit of a safer position when it officially happens and they announce this. So we'll get to that in a second. It's a little tease for you. Yesterday, a third U.S. bank failed in the space of a week. So this bank is called Signature Bank, which, by the way, is the same bank that shut down President Trump's bank accounts after January 6th. Isn't that kind of ironic in a way? Anyway, just had to throw that in there. They shut down his bank accounts because he was too risky after January 6th. They didn't like the risk associated with him, Trump, and January 6th, Signature Bank. And now they've collapsed. As David Schaefer says on Twitter, Signature Bank famously closed President Trump's bank accounts to signal its virtue. Go woke.
Investors lose their money. That's how capitalism works.
Oh, is that how capitalism works? He's giving us a lesson in capitalism. Credit for it, right? He's like, I instructed, it was my administration moved very quickly. We moved very quickly. So as not to have further panic, right? They want this to hit. They're going to. I need my money. I need to not be a part of a startup anymore.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm telling you, the babysitter right now. I just don't see how you're going to win up against these behemoths.
Yeah, I want to believe that cryptocurrency is the punk rock that could take on the man. But I'm not optimistic about it.
Well, like I
change
said,
my mind, please.
When we were doing Morning Invest, I said, there's no way, you're going to have to reverse engineer the system, because if you just say, hey, we're just going to adopt Bitcoin or whatever, you're going to have to create debit cards and stuff that put it into the hands the way people are already used to using it. You can't expect people to learn a whole new system of money. So it's like, that would be the hardest part of it, is taking it backwards first to then move it forward. Whereas they're going to have an advantage with the government because they can do that. They can put it in the debit cards. They can get the banks on board to do this for them. So we'll be stuck and have to take it.
Yeah, and you'll have no other choice. So this is all orchestrated under both Trump and the Biden regulators. You can blame Biden, you can blame Trump, you can blame Obama. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. It's a distraction, because under both Trump and Biden, regulators and the Fed encouraged banks to hold treasury bonds. They both did, which lose enormous value when interest rates rise. So unlike 2008, when all of these mortgage loans were causing the problem and the banks where they roll out and they do this immediately. So if there was a real big concern about bank runs, you wouldn't see YouTube videos on it. You wouldn't see, I mean, arguably you would still see tweets if Elon Musk is still there, but you wouldn't see it all over the nightly newscasts.
Yeah.
It would be suppressed. Nord Stream, right? Here's an example, right? It's not even, it shows up on no nightly newscasts. It's largely suppressed. COVID, all of these things. And so I
Saudi Arabia News.
In Beijing, a historic handshake between rivals as the foreign ministers of Iran and Saudi Arabia meet for the first time in 7 years. It was a photo op for China as well, eager to show itself as the broker of peace and challenging the United States' role as the main outside power broker in the Middle East.
China welcomes and appreciates the continuous improvement of the relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran. We will continue to contribute
On the Saudi embassy in Tehran, an act of revenge by the Iranians. Middle East, including Yemen, where the two rival powers have waged a proxy war and where tens of thousands of people have been killed and millions are on the brink of starvation. But in March, after a series of meetings mediated by Beijing, the two countries surprised the world, announcing they would restore diplomatic relations. After the foreign ministers met on Thursday, they released a joint statement laying out plans to reopen embassies and consulates within 2 months and plans to
सऊदी अरब पाकिस्तान को $2 अरब देगा। IMF ने इसकी तस्दीक कर दी है। मुत्तहदा अरब अमारात से फंडिंग का भी इंतजार है। तवक्को है कि सऊदी हुक्काम इस ज़मन में वज़ीर आज़म शहबाज शरीफ के दौरे सऊदी अरब के मौके पर बाज़ाब्ता ऐलान करेंगे। सऊदी अरब ने पाकिस्तान को $2 अरब देने की यकीन दहानी करा दी है। IMF ने भी इसकी तस्दीक कर दी है। IMF से स्टाफ लेवल मुआहदे के लिए नज़रें अब मुत्तहदा अरब अमारात पर मरकूज़ हैं। $1 अरब डिपॉजिट से मुतालिक जवाब का इंतजार है। फ्यूल पर सब्सिडी IMF से मुआहदे में एक रुकावट है। सस्ता पेट्रोल प्रोग्राम ख़त्म करना होगा। वज़ीर मुमलिकत बराए ख़जाना आयशा गौस पाशा का कहना है कि बैरूनी फंडिंग की शराइत पूरे होने पर IMF के साथ स्टाफ लेवल मुआहदा तय पा जाएगा। ताज़ा अपडेट यह है कि सऊदी अरब पाकिस्तान को $2 अरब देगा। IMF ने इसकी तस्दीक कर दी है। मुत्तहदा अरब अमारात से फंडिंग का भी इंतज़ार है। तवक्को ये की जा रही है कि सऊदी हुक्काम इस ज़मन में वज़ीर आज़म शहबाज शरीफ के दौरे सऊदी अरब के मौके पर बाज़ाब्ता ऐलान भी करेंगे। वज़ीर मुमलिकत बराए ख़जाना आयशा गौस पाशा का कहना है कि बैरूनी फंडिंग की शराइत पूरी होने पर IMF के साथ स्टाफ लेवल मुआहदा तय पा जाएगा, मगर फ्यूल पर सब्सिडी IMF से मुआहदे में एक रुकावट है। सस्ता पेट्रोल प्रोग्राम ख़त्म करना होगा। सऊदी अरब पाकिस्तान को $2 अरब देगा।
Hello and welcome back to World 360. Could the BRICS countries, which includes Russia, India and 3 others, launch a single currency like the EU's euro? Are Middle Eastern foes, Saudi Arabia and Iran, starting to take baby steps towards restoration of ties? We'll answer all this and more in today's episode. First up, the BRICS countries. As you know, the BRICS speaking at a business forum. Here, he said that the BRICS countries are working on a single currency, agreed to conduct all future trade transactions using their own currencies. We know that India has allowed rupee-ruble payments with Russia, and reports are also emerging that China's yuan has already replaced the dollar as the most traded currency in Russia. As the most with Russia, and reports are also using their own currencies. We know that India has allowed in currency swaps. Brazil. In the wake of the Ukraine war, we're seeing more and more countries opt to settle trade in currency swaps. Ukraine war, we're seeing more and more countries opt to settle trade in currency. More and here, he said that the BRICS countries are working on a single currency that could be used for trade settlements.
According to Sputnik News, this is what he said.
In the wake of the Ukraine war, we're seeing more and more countries opt to settle trade in currency swaps. Brazil and China agreed to conduct all future trade transactions using their own currencies. We know that India has allowed rupee-ruble payments with Russia, and reports are also emerging that China's yuan has already replaced the dollar as the most traded currency in Russia. So clearly, a single currency among BRICS countries would benefit, namely Russia. But is it even viable? Also, would China and India even agree to a single currency given the border standoff in Ladakh? There are a lot of tricky elements to this, both economical and geopolitical. The Financial Times recently came out with a report explaining that BRICS countries are dramatically different in terms of their economic trade growth and financial openness. Russia is economically the weakest of the group, while China is the dominant player. Also, what's to say India will even be open to a single currency within a group where China is dominant? Let's not forget that India opted out of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or the RCEP, years ago due to fears of cheap Chinese imports flooding its markets. If we zoom out for a second, the bigger story here is that the hegemony of the US dollar is being brought into question. We've seen how China's ties with Saudi Arabia have grown warmer in recent months and even led to speculation that Saudi Arabia may be open to accepting the Chinese yuan in oil trading instead of the US dollar. If this happens, it could have wide-ranging implications for the global economy. It doesn't mean the US dollar will cease.
In today's video, I want to share with you the latest update on CBDC central bank digital currency adoption here in the United States and across the world. This has now turned into frequent updates. I know many of my subscribers are very interested in this, very concerned, curious, and so I hope that I'm able to bring some clarity and some interesting facts to you that you can then use to make decisions and to set expectations. I feel that I say this frequently, but at this point we all need to know that CBDC is not a thing of some distant future. It's already here and its development is being accelerated to be fully completed within the next 3 to 5 years. In my recent videos, I shared some very tragic developments from a country that was one of the first ones in the world to implement CBDC. If you haven't yet watched that video, I highly recommend that you do, and I say this because I think it is important to be aware of those red flags. Over the past couple of days, there were several interesting events related to central bank digital currencies. I will start this video with a global update and then share several interesting stories, in my opinion, interesting stories about San Francisco Federal Reserve making a major step toward CBDC progress. So make sure that you stay tuned for that. Japan's central bank is piloting its digital currency, a digital yen, starting in a little more than a month in April. The first proof of concept experiment was done a little less than 2 years ago. Essential transactions such as issuance, payout, and transfer were tested in 2021, and now they are essentially ready to roll it out. The purpose of the pilot program is to develop a system for experiments where a central system, intermediary network systems, and endpoint devices would be configured in an integrated manner. By the way, Japan isn't too far ahead of the game. There is a strong partnership between 4 largest central banks in Asia: the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the Bank of Thailand, the People's Bank of China, and the Central Bank of the UAE. And of course, the Bank of International Settlements is in the middle of that. These entities are working very, very closely to continue developing and to pilot CBDCs in their respective countries as soon as possible. Besides China, Hong Kong, and Thailand, more than 20 countries, including Australia, India, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Brazil, Malaysia, South Africa, and Ghana, will continue or begin in the pilot stage this year in 2023. So things are moving very, very fast.
Me is a big relief because I've known about this for ages, and I've been absolutely shocked and horrified that people that I interact with socially, arguably intelligent, well-informed people, hadn't even heard about a central bank digital currency or the idea that it's so potentially close to becoming a reality in the United States. I mean, that's even after Executive Order 16047 that President Biden signed into law in March of 2022. But okay, thankfully, we are now seeing some pushback on the mainstream stage, and there is some pushback from politicians, at least in the United States, against all of this. For example, we've had House Majority Whip Congressman Emmer push back with the CBDC Anti-Surveillance Act. He said he wants to make sure that there's oversight over the Fed before any kind of digital currency is issued, maintaining that any digital dollar must uphold the American values of private individual sovereignty and free market competitiveness. We also had Florida Governor Ron DeSantis come out recently and say no CBDCs in Florida. South Dakota's Governor Kristi Noem has spoken out against CBDCs. Senator Ted Cruz recently introduced legislation to prohibit the Fed from establishing a retail CBDC, saying that it is a threat to privacy, to economic freedom, and warning how a CBDC can, in fact, be an Orwellian tool of surveillance and control. So with these signs of resistance, is this, in fact, inevitable, or is there a way, either through legislation or perhaps protest, that we can still prevent this?
Yeah, there is a way that it can be prevented. And like I said, you vote with your purse. You vote with your wallet. If you stay in the system, because let me tell you, you may have protests, but big enough crisis, all those protests are going to be silenced if they can be convinced that this is going to save the day. Mm-hmm. It's not. It is going to bring us into a full surveillance economy. And the other thing that I did want to also say, because you brought up a really good point, is that if enough people do this, then the government, if they buy gold, then the government is going to more than likely go in and confiscate. So it matters what kind of gold you buy, because if you buy what everybody else out there is buying, that's the kind of gold that is likely to get confiscated. But yes, if we all come together and we say, okay, we're not buying digital currencies, we're not buying stocks or bonds or this or that, we're buying gold, we're buying silver, and we're taking possession of it. This is what they can't control. Because of the probability, because I agree with you. I mean, history tells us that, and even current history is telling us that the most likely outcome is if the government feels threatened by people buying gold, that they'll take it away. So buy it in collectible form.
Why would that make a difference?
Welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to have you here. My name is Neha Narula, and I am the director of the Digital Currency Initiative at MIT. Central bank digital currency, or CBDC, is top of mind with over 100 central banks around the world engaging in research, pilots, and exploration. But in 2023, we're in a context marked by geopolitical fragility, financial instability, and market distrust in institutions. Since we are still at the beginning, it remains to be seen exactly what kinds of outcomes CBDCs, once implemented, will have. Will they help solve for financial inclusion or deepen the digital divide? Can CBDCs unify geopolitical and technical fragmentation in payment and economic systems, or might they exacerbate it? In our recent work at MIT, we've said that CBDC has the opportunity to play an important role as a public good, serving the public interest both as a public money and as a public money technology. But so much of this outcome depends on the design decisions that we make today.
Good morning. We we are bringing to you today's most important news from around the world. Despite all the extraordinary efforts, the government and health system workers are still struggling to bend the curve of growing cases caused by the latest variant of the virus. 5 more people died today and 30 million tested positively. Citizens are now required to wear masks when they step out to the balconies of their isolation facilities and take them off only when they are back to the safety of their rooms. Stay compliant. Stay isolated. Stay safe. And now, on to other news. As the whole planet went on the righteous crusade against climate change and global warming, we are excited to spread the word about another successful project. As science tells us, during the night, plants release CO2 into the atmosphere. CO2 is a powerful greenhouse gas that dramatically contributes to global warming. But don't worry. Almost 100,000 square miles of South American rainforest has been cleared, and this area is used to construct one of the largest solar panel fields in the world that will provide us with a tremendous amount of clean energy. We will keep fighting the deadly forests and defeat climate change. That is all for today. Stay tuned for tomorrow's news.
Bruce Kowalski, your weekly food ration has arrived.
Mask up your nose.
The Godfather movie is banned from our database for misrepresentation and stereotypization of the Italian community. Pulp Fiction movie is banned from our database for excessive violence and racist content. The movie 1984 never existed.
Stay compliant. Stay isolated. Stay safe. And now, on to other news. Say goodbye to cows and beef. As you might know, cows and livestock agriculture in general is a source of methane, a powerful greenhouse gas. Cows fart, and the temperature on Earth rises 1 degree with each cow fart, contributing to global warming. This is why the authorities started a cow extermination program, and today the last herd of cows has been dealt with. The Earth has officially become a cow-free planet, and climate change is finally under control. You might get concerned, where would we obtain our proteins from? Chicken and pork are not commonly accessible products, and beef is gone now. Do not worry. Hundreds of alternative protein manufacturing facilities have been constructed on each continent. They process thousands of tons of protein-rich food. This alternative food contains way more protein than beef. It is cheap to cultivate and it doesn't contribute to global warming. Kudos to science and green agenda. That is all for today. Stay tuned for tomorrow's news.
Bruce Kowalski. Your monthly universal basic income has been deposited into your account. For more information, press details. You have been paid 2,000 central bank digital tokens. The following fees are being deducted: accommodation fee, food ration fee, recycling fee, clean energy fee, personal greenhouse gas emissions fee, climate change fee, diversity fee. Your current remaining balance is 5 central bank digital tokens, and if not spent, it will expire in 7 days. Attention. Important announcement.
Dear residents of the quarantine facility number 89, great news. Here at Nova Gene Labs, we grant you a chance to participate in the trials of our new drug, which has been developed by our research team. This drug is absolutely safe and will bring the end to the deadly virus we are all fighting together for the last several years. Those of you who chose to participate will get a significant social credit score boost. As the result, you will be relocated to a superior isolation facility, receive a higher universal basic income, and become eligible for an improved food ration. Should you choose to participate in the Nova Gene Labs clinical trials program, our specialist will visit you within the next few hours, make an injection, and will be daily monitoring your condition online. Your participation is very important to us and the rest of the world. Make a difference. Follow the science and make the right choice. Nova Gene Labs is not responsible for any side effects, injuries, or death followed after the injection. Sorry to hear that.
new virus that emerged in Asia a couple of months ago keeps spreading all over the world. Some countries are imposing lockdowns and stay-home orders to protect their populations from this highly contagious disease. In our country, 3 persons in their 90s died of the virus in long-term care facilities. The virus keeps spreading in our country. Almost 500 new cases have been registered last week. As of today, the whole country is going into a complete lockdown. The health authorities are imposing a strict stay-at-home order. While these measures are tough, they are temporary. We need only 2 weeks to bend the curve.
The pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world.
Despite strict lockdowns being in place, the virus cases keep growing exponentially. The government is considering the option of proclaiming a state of emergency in some areas and relocating citizens to safe and isolated quarantine facilities.
Attention all citizens. Your district is contaminated and you will be evacuated immediately. Please take only necessary personal belongings and step outside of your homes. You will be transported to a safe, isolated location.
Attention. Non-compliant resident alert. Attention. Non-compliant resident alert. Attention. Non-compliant resident alert. Attention. Non-compliant resident alert. Attention. Non-compliant resident